Hello and welcome to my half-assed guide on installing ESXi on Lenovo M720Qs to help other people that want to do the same thing. There's going to be 3 parts. I picked up my GoPro and I show you the installs on each device happening. ESXi configuration, that'll be on my computer, and as well as deploying vCenter appliance and configuring a cluster. Thanks for coming to my TED Talk.
Alright, I'm going to try to make this as quick as possible, get straight to the point. So, I have a Lenovo ThinkCenter M720Q. This is actually mislabeled, but this is one of 3 for my Homelab down there. They are configured with a WD Black SN750 SE NVMe SSD, just standard consumer. I also got this USB-C to Ethernet adapter to work, and was able to previously configure ESXi 7U3. I believe it's either 7U3. Yeah. So ESXi 7U3. I have it here on this USB. I'm doing a full reinstall because the evaluation license expired. But I'm just going to show you that the install actually works, and it takes everything that you need for at least a small Homelab cluster. Alright, so here I have it all plugged in. The only thing I have for HDMI is my TV right now. All my other monitors are in use. I have my keyboard plugged in. I'm going to power it on. Spam F2 and F12 because I always forget the keys. And there we go. Oh shit, I got the wrong screen. Alright, now I'm on the right screen. So the BIOS is either F1 or F2. I honestly forgot. But go down to Startup, Primary Boot Sequence, make sure USB HDD1 is selected. And we will go ahead and do F10. Yes. And it'll say up there, loading ESXi installer. Finally loaded after a few minutes, doesn't take that long. Press enter, press F11. It's going to scan for devices. Might take a few seconds. Alright, so I'm going to select the NVMe that I have installed here. Sorry if you can't see it that well. This is the best I can do. Press enter, it's going to scan. It's probably going to complain that there's already an ESXi installation on it. Yep. So I'm going to install ESXi, overwrite the original VMFS data store. My keyboard layout is US default. My root password, I'm not sharing that with you. And F11 to install. So we finished. It says to remove the installation media before rebooting. So I'm going to do that right now, taking out the USB drive and enter to reboot. Alright, and here we can see it loading up. Lenovo, then my serial number. And it's loading everything, and yeah, it works. Alright, great. Now we have made it to the home screen as if you're watching a console on a server, because we're directly plugged in via HDMI on this little Lenovo. There's usually a few extra steps here. If you are not on DHCP, you're going to have to set the static IP. And how to do that is you press F2. The login name is root, and then your root password that you just set during installation. You press enter, give it a few seconds, it'll come up. Configure management network, it's the 3rd selection down. Configure network adapters, VLAN, IPv4. I'm set to DHCP already, so this is fine. Let's see here. DNS configuration. If you have a DNS server, you might want to set it right here. Now, for my use, I like naming my ESXi hosts. So my host name is going to be ESXi 1. I press enter, then it's set. My DNS server is the little router I have here in my little rack. It is an Edgerouter X. Works perfectly, beautifully, and does everything I need to do. I forgot one step. So from here, you have to press escape, press yes. And then that'll set your host name and whatever network configurations that you just made. If you screwed up, you can go all the way to the bottom and reset the system configuration. And now I'm fully logged out. Now I'm going to install it on the other two. I have it plugged in already, but I don't know where the hell I put my USB. Where the hell is it? Okay, I found it. Okay, so the first thing that you're going to do is log into your managed router if you have one. Whatever is delivering the DHCP to your ESXi hosts. Again, I'm using an Edgerouter X from Ubiquiti. So I'm going to go to Services. I'm going to go to my DHCP, View Details, Leases. I'm going to map these static IPs as such. So ESXi 1, ESXi 2, and ESXi 3. Alright, great. And we can see it here in the static MAC IP, leasing, mapping, whatever you call it. I don't think this is necessarily a requirement. It's just something I like to do so the IP addresses don't change. My normal LAN, I am outside of the actual network that my Homelab is in. I prefer it this way. It's just my preference. Okay, to begin configuring, you're going to go to the IP address that is displayed on each ESXi host after you installed it. It's going to say your connection is not private, which is fine. You're going to log in with root, and then your root password. And then say no, you don't want to join the VMware Customer Experience Improvement Program. It's a Homelab. Alright, cool. So we're here. The first thing we need to do is configure the NTP settings, or else you're going to have lots of issues. You want to get your time right across your entire Homelab environment. So we want to go to the navigator on the left side, click Manage, and then we're going to go over to System, Time and Date. And then we're going to edit NTP settings. We're going to use the Network Time Protocol client. Stop and stop manually. And you're going to throw in the North American pool ntp.org pools if you're in North America. Again, this is pretty much based on where you are in the world. I use the North America pools from pool.ntp.org. Then you click Save. So on the same page here within Manage, you want to go over to Services, and then you want to start your NTPD daemon. So we're just going to right-click it and go to Start, and confirm that it's running. Great. So it's showing this current UTC time. That looks correct to me. For next, I don't fucking know. Okay, I just remembered. You got to install the USB to Ethernet Fling driver. If you're not using USB to Ethernet drivers, you can skip over this part. But anyways, you want to go over to your storage, Datastore 1. What you want to do is open up the Datastore browser, create a directory, call it USB Fling, create directory, and then from here you can actually upload files. So we're going to upload, Jesus, I have so many things on my desktop. Where is it? Oh, I have the wrong driver. Let me go grab the right driver. Okay, so I did a simple, quick Google search, and I have found the USB Network Native Driver for USB Network Native Driver for ESXi. It's right from the VMware.com website, and their subdomain called Flings. I have read and agreed to the technical preview license, and I'm going to download this. Great. Alright, so now that you have downloaded the proper zip file, you're going to go back to your Datastore browser. You're going to click upload on that new directory we just created. Holy crap, lots of stuff. Select the ESXi 703 VMK USB NIC Fling zip folder. It goes up as a zip. And it uploads instantly. Fantastic. You will then go to host. You're going to turn on SSH with actions, services, enable secure shell. It's going to yell at you because it's not necessary unless you're doing administrative stuff. So, what we're going to do now is we're going to SSH into this host. You want to log in as root at 10.0.0.2. The next thing you want to do is place this host into maintenance mode, and you can do that with this command here. And paste ESXi system maintenance mode set-e true. Done. Great. Alright, so the next thing you want to do is find the zip file that you just uploaded. So cd to the root directory, the top level, and then what you're going to do is cd vmfs/volumes. And then we can see here when we list out this directory, there's Datastore 1. So we're going to go in the Datastore 1. Notice here that when we go in the Datastore 1, it's just long, random letters and numbers. I believe this is simply a soft link to the actual directory in Linux terms. So anyways, we're going to continue here. So we're going to go down to Datastore. Wait, no, we're already here. Datastore 1. We're going to go down to the next directory, which should just be the one that we just created, USB Fling, cd USB Fling. Alright, what's in here? Oh look, the zip file's in there. Alright, so here's what you want to do. ESXi software component apply-d, and you have to do the full pwd, parent working directory. Volumes, volume name is Datastore 1, USB Fling, and then the zip file. If you just simply hit tab, it will do it all for you. And look at that, it installed the Fling driver. That's great. So, but you may notice it says reboot required. True. Okay, so we're gonna go back to our host. Alright, so we're back at the host now. Now, remember, do not plug in your USB to Ethernet device just yet. What you have to do is reboot the host, which you can simply do right here, Navigator, Host, Reboot. And reboot. There we go. It's going to take some time. Alright, when your host comes back up, you want to fully confirm that it installed. So what you're going to do is go to Manage, and go to Packages, and then there's a little search bar at the top right here. Just type in Fling. And there you have it. VMK USB-NIC-Fling. You installed your Fling driver. Now you can connect your USB to Ethernet adapter and it should work. Once you have fully confirmed that it's installed, you could take each host out of maintenance mode. You do that by going back to Host, Actions, and exit maintenance mode. Quick tip here, if you didn't rename your hosts when we originally set them up, you can go to your default TCP IP stack, and right here, you can click Edit Settings, and change the host name right here, along with the primary DNS and secondary DNS servers. Another tip here is when you connect your USB to Ethernet NIC, it will show up as VUSB0, not to be confused with VMNIC0. VMNIC0 is the onboard NIC there, and then VUSB0 is your USB to Ethernet NIC. Another quick tip is, as you notice, on each host, the very first data store is going to be named Datastore 1. I like to rename these to whatever hosts that they are on, so that when I join them to a cluster later on in vCenter, I can know which one I'm looking at. So simply click on, in the navigator, Storage, Datastore 1, Actions, Rename, and I'm going to put NVMe, just because it's an NVMe drive. Or maybe I'll put that after. I'll do ESXi 1-NVMe. And I'm going to do that for the rest as well. Next, we're going to install VMware vCenter appliance. You should have to download the vCenter appliance. You have to like log in and register with VMware to do it. I honestly forgot how to do it. I just have it on my desktop. On Windows users, you can mount ISOs directly to your computer. We will be deploying vCenter over Ethernet. So right-click this, mount, and it should open. And then we're going to do the UI installer, Win32, and double-click this installer EXE right here. All right, so since this is a brand new installation of vCenter server, we're going to click install. And we're going to do stage 1, click next. We're going to accept the terms of license agreement, click next, and then we're going to enter the IP address of our target device. So I'm going to deploy this to ESXi 3, which is 10.0.0.4 on 443. And then for the username and password, it's just root and your root password for that device. Click next. It's going to give you a certificate warning. Say yes. Okay, so when you get to this screen, the VM name, I personally like to tie it to whatever domain I'm setting up in the environment eventually. So I own jquhas.com as an example. What I'm going to do is set up a subdomain within my Homelab called ad.jquhas.com. That's going to be my root domain. Now, the reason I do this is so that my Homelab does not reach out to the internet and go to my public DNS records. I'm going to have it pointing to my domain controller, which is ad.jquhas.com, so that it resolves locally. So anyways, I'm going to do vcenterserve.ad.jquhas.com, and eventually it will make sense for me, personally. I personally do not like to use vSphere.local or any of the .local domains. It just doesn't make sense to me why you would use a .local domain. If you own your own domain, just make a subdomain of that locally. I'm going to enter my root password. This is setting the root password for the vCenter appliance, by the way. Click next. My deployment size is definitely going to be tiny. And then your storage size is going to be left to default. Click next. I'm going to deploy it directly to the data store that's on there. It's super fast. It's an NVMe. And we're going to enable thin disk mode. I don't want to do thick provisioning. And then on the network settings page, my IP assignment is going to be DHCP because that's what I'm using in my Homelab. If it's separate, if you're using something different, you have an IP address reserved already from your router, go ahead and set it here. But I use DHCP because I like to keep things simple. And I'm going to click next. Everything I is and thin. I don't use all my disk space. So and both HTTP and HTTPS ports are on. So right there, those port numbers. Going to click finish, and it's going to install it over the network. Just a special note here. This is going to probably take a while. Stage 1 and Stage 2, I believe, take some time. I am wired in on Ethernet on my computer here. It's 1 gigabits per second. I would not recommend deploying this over Wi-Fi. It would probably take even longer. It's about 9 gigs. Alright, so Stage 1 completed. I'm going to click Continue. It's going to load up the Stage 2. Now, at this point, you can do it through the web browser. I'm just going to continue using the UI installer to continue this. If you do want to use the appliance on the web client, you got to go to whatever IP address was assigned to vCenter server and go to port 5480 on HTTPS, and you'll be able to do Stage 2 there. But I'm just going to continue using the installer. Click Next. Time synchronization mode. I'm going to set it to, let's see here in my notes. I'm going to set it to the ESXi host because remember earlier we had already set up the NTP servers. SSH access I'm going to keep disabled. Let's see here. So we have to create a new SSO domain, and for that SSO domain, I'm going to do sso.jakeuhaws.com. Now you could set this to whatever else you want. I own jakeuhaws.com. This is going to be another subdomain pretty much. The single sign-on username is going to be administrator. I'm going to set the password. And great, I'm going to click next. I'm not going to join VMware's customer experience program. Sorry, VMware. And finish. And there we go. It's in the process. It's going to take another good while. Alright, finally, we have it installed. And now we can navigate to whatever IP address is listed here. Don't lose it. It's .5 for me. I'm just so lucky. It went in order 2, 3, 4 for the ESXi host, 5 for the vCenter. That's great. So we're going to navigate to that on our web browser here in just a moment. And when we throw it in there, we're going to get the certificate error. We're going to proceed anyways. Now, for when you're logging in for the very first time, unlike your ESXi host, if you remember, it was administrator, but it's going to yell at you if you just try using administrator alone. You have to use the SSO domain that you set up, which is sso.jakeuhaws.com for me, and then the password that you had set up during the installation process, and then you click login. Now, the very first thing I do when I log into vCenter is I change the theme. I like going to dark mode. It looks way better on the eyes. I get rid of these notifications at the top here because I think they're annoying. We're going to reset that to green there. Okay, now we're all set up and ready to go. Now, you must be wondering, where are my ESXi hosts? Well, we have to add them. But before we add them, we have to create a new data center. So go on the left side here in the vSphere client. Click on the vCenter server right there. Right click it, new data center. I'm going to call this Homelab. Now when Homelab was created, now I can right click it and do add host. You could do it by a IP address. So 10.0.0.2, that's ESXi host number 1 for me. Click next. Username is root. The password is the password that I set. Click next. It's going to give you a security alert. Click yes. Look at that. Next. It's going to be the evaluation license because, you know, us Homelabbers were broke anyways after buying all our gear. For lockdown mode, I'm going to keep it disabled. VM locations is going to be in the data center. Click finish. We're going to do the same thing for the other two. After you add your host to your data center, you might notice that there's a ton of alarms going off. It doesn't know what the hell happened the last time it booted up. It's giving you a TPM attestation alarm. Just ignore them. Reset them all to green. We don't care. This is for Homelab use right now, and we're going to keep things simple. So now, before we do anything else, vCenter server eats up your RAM. I'm going to switch the new view here. It is chunky. It likes to use 12 gigabytes of RAM for some reason, but I'm telling you today that you do not need to allocate 12 gigabytes to it. It works at 6 gigabytes as well. This is what I did on my last installation, and I'm going to, for practical purposes in my lab, since I don't have a lot of RAM, I'm going to reduce the amount of RAM that this virtual machine has, because I only got 16 gigabytes per host, and you can see here it is eating up a lot of memory. Now, typically, you'd probably try to set it right here. However, vSphere will literally not allow you to do that. It wants you to use 12 gigs of RAM. Now, since we're a home lab, and we're in Homeland purposes, I'm dropping it down to 6. I'm going to show you how. So the first thing that we're going to do is log in to the host that it's currently on. And what we're going to do is we're actually going to power this off. And obviously you're going to lose connection to your vSphere client. So when we go back here into the host, we're going to wait for it to turn off. Right now it's on. Alright, it finally shut off. So what I'm going to do here is click Edit, and I'm going to set this to 6 gigabytes of RAM. I'm going to click Save, and then I'm going to power it on. Now, for those of you who are doing this, it might complain and send off an alarm on the appliance side. You might see it in the vSphere vCenter appliance when you log in. Just ignore it. It still works just fine. Now, if you have more than 32 gigabytes per host, you will not have to do this step. You'll have plenty of memory to use. Now, when you're starting up vCenter after a reboot or a cold start, give it some time. It's going to take some time to start all of its services again. Yeah, and as we can see, it says status 404. So it's still booting up. I can try it one more time. See if it lets me in. And it's loading. And look at that. It's loading in. Okay, so we took down vCenter, completely stopped it. We went to the direct host that it was on to set it down to 6 gigabytes of RAM. Again, this is me personally doing it because I do not have a lot of RAM in my Homelab, and I don't necessarily have the money to upgrade to 32 gigabytes on each host just yet. However, that is the workaround that we could use. The boot up from a cold boot or even a restart of vCenter appliance can take some time. It can take up to 10 minutes sometimes. So anyways, we are back. We set this down to 6 gigabytes of RAM. The next thing we're going to do is drop everything, each host, into a cluster. So what we're going to do here is right click on the data center. We're going to do new cluster. And I'm just going to name it Homelab cluster. For now, I'm going to keep DRS, HA, and vSAN off. I'm not going to manage all the hosts in the cluster with a single image. I'm going to click Next and click Finish. It's that easy to create a cluster. Now, a little bit more difficult is adding all the hosts when one of your hosts is hosting vSphere. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to add the first 2 hosts that do not have vCenter on them. And then I'm going to wait for them to be fully configured. I think I have to do some configuration here. We have to put them in the maintenance mode. So I'm going to go ahead and throw them in the maintenance mode. And once that's finished, I can click Configure Cluster. So this screen might be a little bit intimidating to new users. What happens when you add hosts to a cluster, they need at least one NIC to be designated to that cluster. That's why we installed the VMware NIC drivers earlier to do a USB NIC on our little tiny Homelab there. Now what I'm going to do is use dswitch1 on the vUSB 0 adapter for both of these. I'm going to click Next, and then on this next page I think we can ignore it because the NTP server is already configured on each host. And then we're going to keep enhanced EVC disabled for now and click Finish. Now they should drop out of maintenance mode here in a second. And look at that. Now they're in a cluster. Alright, so now we need to add the final host to the cluster. The first thing I have to do is move our vCenter appliance into one of these hosts here. And I totally forgot that we have to enable vMotion on one of the physical NICs that we have there, or the VMware kernels. So what I'm going to do here is go down to Configure, under Networking, VM Kernel Adapters. We see VMK0 there, and what I can do is click the, I call it the hamburger menu, but it's a little row action button here. Click Edit, and what you want to do is enable vMotion. Now, in a production setting, you probably have a different NIC that's dedicated only to vMotion, and you would have another NIC that's dedicated to vSAN if you're running vSAN. For Homelab purposes, I'm just throwing it on the same one as the management network. It's fine, it works fine, it just takes a little bit of time. On this host down here, the third host, ESXi 3, I'm going to have to do the same thing. So I'm going to go down to VMware kernel adapters, click Edit, I'm going to enable vMotion, and I'll do it on the ESXi 2 as well. And now I'm going to right click on this one here, our virtual machine, and I'm going to migrate it to the cluster. So what I'm going to do is change both compute resource and storage. It's very important. We want to move everything over. And I'm going to move it to the cluster, and I'm going to choose ESXi host number 2, which ends in 3. I know it's confusing. Click Next, and its target data store, ESXi 2 NVMe, and click Next, and then click Next again. This might take some time. You might lose connection to your vCenter client, but that's okay. I'm going to click Next here, and schedule vMotion with high priority. Absolutely. Click Next, and finish. And it's going to take some time to do this. You might see it pop up here down in the recent tasks. It's going to take at least 1 to 2 minutes to perform this action. Alright, after waiting some time, we notice that it has completed its migration of relocating the virtual machine. Anyways, we need to move this last host into the cluster, which is very simple. You just drag and drop, and it pops it in there. And then what you do is you go back to the cluster, you go to the Configure tab here. When you select your cluster, you need to throw your final host into maintenance mode. It did it for me automatically. How nice is that? So when you drop a host into a cluster, it usually follows the rules and services that you set up in the cluster itself, and it should auto configure itself when you throw it into maintenance mode, and then it will remove that out of maintenance mode, which is great. Alright, so what now? Well, first off, you're finished. You have 3 hosts in your cluster. You have vCenter set up. Everything's syncing to NTP on each host. We set up those pools. We set up vMotion on the NICs. Sorry, the VM kernels, not the NICs. Now, the world's your oyster at this point. You can configure DRS, high availability, vSAN, that's another one you can configure. However, for vSAN, if you're going to set it up, do not use USB drives as your cache disk. I tried that, and it was incredibly slow. If you need shared storage for your hosts, I'd recommend going with a NAS if you're on a tiny Homelab environment. If you have a larger environment and could support multiple SSDs per host, I do recommend doing vSAN. I just warn you that it is a little bit of a pain to set up.
Alright, so now that it's all complete, you possibly want to copy my own mini-micro tiny PC lab environment that supports vCenter. So what you can do is you look on Amazon. Again, I'm running a Lenovo ThinkCentre M720Q for all 3 of my hosts. I bought 1 from Amazon and 2 from Micro Center. You kind of have to look around for deals. In terms of what you're doing, if you're going to be using a lot of compute power, you're obviously going to need, at least an i5 in there. But if you don't care, if you're just experimenting, an i3-8100 will do fine. i3-8100T as well. The big difference between the processors ending with T versus non-T is just their TDP throughput. So my first computer there has an i3-8100T, my first ESXi host, and if you can look here, it says TDP, it's 35 watts. So if we look here at the definition, thermal design power represents the average power in watts the processor dissipates when operating at base frequency with all cores active under an Intel-defined high-complexity workload. So even during high workloads, it's only going to use 35 watts. My other two ESXi hosts have i5 8600s. So these max out at 65 watts. I never use that much anyways. If anything, these idle at about, I don't know, 30 watts, maybe less. I haven't looked into it recently much, but yeah, so when looking for these deals, if you want to do ESXi 7 or later for vCenter, you might want to go with an 8th gen core. I've heard earlier core versions don't, like Intel Gen 6, Intel Gen 7s are not compatible. Likewise, none of this is enterprise hardware. So technically, it's not supported by VMware, period. But people have had better luck with 8th gen processors and newer when upgrading to ESXi 7 or installing a fresh copy. And for the internals, they do have an M2 slot on the inside of them. So I threw in a WD Black SN750. I went and bought this at Best Buy when it was on sale for like $50. Bought one for each host. Pretty simple. ESXi installs on it, and I can run VMs off of it. It's pretty fast. And then for the USB to Ethernet, I just bought an Insignia USB Type-C. It works with the Fling driver. The Fling driver itself is community driven, so Homelabbers alike are likely supporting this. So you should not run into any issues when using the Fling driver. It's pretty compatible. Now, how did I hear about this great idea of running a home lab on old enterprise tiny PCs? Well, I came across a YouTube channel called ServeTheHome, and they're running a project called TinyMiniMicro, and they do tons of reviews on each of these tiny PCs, and they are a great resource for finding what you really want. As you can see here, not only ThinkCenter Lenovo's are available, but you have the Dell Optiplex, you have HP making their ProDesk, and there's a funny picture down here. So HPE has this TinyMicro server, and yet you can have 3 of these stacked up using the same amount of foot space. So it's almost like it's a sleeper lab. So, and much more accessible in terms of instead of using Raspberry Pis. So this is great. They also have forums where I was able to research on what to do, what to buy, and they are just great. I love this website. I love this community, and I think they'll help you too if you're trying to do the same kind of micro lab that I am. So I just wanted to say thank you for taking the time to watch the entire video. I just wanted to put this video out there. I know it's half-assed, especially in the beginning, but I wanted to at least give a video format of someone successfully installing VMware ESXi on a tiny home lab, infrastructure. There is no other videos on YouTube that I could find other than ServeTheHome's reviews. I hope this video helps you, and I hope your day goes well.